Wait for the stupid ads to play. Because even though I have Twitch Prime, it forces ads on me now. That makes me happy. Fuck.
Really? Really?
Mm-hmm.
You are kidding me.
Yeah, I'm really irritated by that. I want to do that. Facebook. Share somewhere else. Well, that's fun. Seriously. It's showing, it's like the Facebook share is deciding to use title from 2 episodes ago.
Oh, for the love of God.
Streamlabs picked up what I put in Twitch, and I didn't have to change it there manually, so that was cool, but now I've got on Facebook, yeah, it's doing the sex abuse title. Sharing on a page I manage is then not giving me the Heresy and Hearsay choice, or any choices. So the Facebook sharing is broken. So I'm gonna have to do that manually. Let's see.
All right, let me get it on Twitter while you're doing that.
Okay.
I just, because it emailed us, so. Of course, it didn't do what it's supposed to do. Oh, there we go. All right.
Excuse me.
Log out as that. Nope, not going to do that. Look at this. I'll do it on my phone. It's easier to switch on my phone.
Alright, I just titled it with what we're actually talking about instead of the bullshit that from Twitch. That is wrong. Twitch, why are you being stupid? And it is displaying correctly on Twitch for a change.
It is. It's display. Yeah, I know. I you know. It's,
Weird.
All
right.
Okay. So on my Twitter and on our Twitter has been shared. All right. So shall we start?
All right. Yep. Ready to go.
All right. So I have major depression disorder with suicidal ideation. Former counselors that I have had believe that I've had some form of depression since an early age. There's a formal term for this. Sadly, I don't know it. I wanted to be upfront about where I am and where I'm coming from before we start the topic for today. I also wanted to say that I have an understanding of where those who deal with this every day go through. As I'm trying to find help so that I can have better days, I hope that each of you are doing the same. My hope and prayer is that you find the strength to reach out for help. Mental health is very important, and there are resources we will talk about at the end of this to help you, especially for those who don't have means to seek help through counseling because of the cost. So let's talk about mental health.
Welcome to Heresy and Hearsay, a podcast to reclaim faith in the context of political discussion. I'm September, also known as 9 of 12, and you can follow me on Twitch and Twitter at 9 of 12, that's NINEOF 12, and hear me on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Cape podcast. You can follow Heresy and Hearsay on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and whatever podcast catcher you use. Please like, share, follow, subscribe, and all that great stuff. Barney?
And I'm Reverend Barney. You can follow me at Heresy and Hearsay. I'm sorry, you can follow me at Seth Roth II. That's the character with the II at the end. Heresy and Hearsay has a Patreon site where you can find us at patreon.com/heresy and hearsay, where you can visit and help support us. Just $2 goes a long way to make this humble show. We also have a website at heresyandhearsay.com where you can find our latest podcast as well as articles we'll probably start posting soon. So,
Well, I'm going to go ahead and give a little intro to my own mental health issues. I suffer from major depressive disorder as well, in a chronic way, as well as anxiety. Some serious bouts of. I fortunately can get the care I need for that. I went through counseling a lot when I was younger. I'm not currently in counseling, but I have a general practitioner who, because I do not abuse it and use it very infrequently, will give me my anxiety medication in that way. I am also a suicide attempt survivor. Yeah, I suffer from occasional ideation. Fortunately, not often. I have been hospitalized for that in the past. Um, my family also has issues ongoing. I have had to go through 2 of my 3 sons being hospitalized with mental health issues. So I have a lot of information, experience, and resources in the venue of getting help.
so the reason I wanted to talk about this first is this is going to be kind of a month of us talking about healthcare, science, stuff like that. And I wanted to talk about this first, especially considering the fact that this past weekend I had a major what is termed a major downturn. I woke up I want to say Friday. I can't it's been a haze. I woke up Friday in tears, and I just wanted everything to stop. I was tired of my life. I was tired of things going the way it was going. And I'm a person of faith, and faith has got me through a lot of this prayer, but I know prayer alone is not the answer. And that's one of the things I want to talk about is because going through this and learning as much as I have learned in the past about what the Bible says and what a good chunk of Christian counselors talk about is is not the case. I will have some links in the art in the discussion, but there is a article that I found where it says, yes, of course there is discussion, there's depression, and there is prayer is helpful for those who are spiritual, but you have to understand that this is not this is not a you're just in the dumps kind of thing. You need to cheer up. This is a physical disorder that requires medication in some cases it requires coping mechanisms, but it is still a physical disorder. You just can't see it. That's one of the things about mental disease and mental distress and disorders like this is that a it's not a cut and dry. You can see that someone's suffering. Someone can be smiling and laughing and still have depression. One of the examples that a lot of people like to bring up these days, especially, is Robin Williams. But I'm sure he's not alone, especially as comedians. But he was a brilliant comedian, very funny. There was episode of the Actor Studio was like a 2 hour long, basically him improving on the fly and being hilarious, to the point where story goes that a woman actually had to go to the hospital because she laughed so much she caused herself to have a hernia. So, but he had his depression too. He had his he had his troubles and his pain, and he took his own life. There are, and I don't want to say artists, but they're the ones we know the best, but there are a lot of people that Tears of a Clown, that old Smokey Robinson song, where, and that's one of the situations that we deal with as humans, is that depression does affect a lot of people. It's just that it's been seen as oh, you just, you need to get over it and do something. And there is a point of talking about mental illness, and there is trying to find positive motivations and stuff like that help it's cognitive thinking, I think it is called, or they're starting to do this a little bit more, where they try to help you find a focal point and focus on this happy point, or this point that makes you understand things.
Yeah, there are
um
different types of therapy. You're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy,
right.
right? And that's something that's really the therapist one of my sons is currently going to practices that, and it seems to have gotten through where things like talk therapy, which is kind of a Freudian concept, wasn't working. There's a lot of different types of therapy, but the cognitive behavioral is something that's gives you a path, right? Like if it's a lot of if thens in my
Hmm.
experience. Like, okay, if you're feeling this way, then look for do this first. Like whether it's a breathing exercise or a change of just what you're doing or environment, like, and then you can start to get to someone, get help, or just do something different than spiral and examine, like, okay, this is my brain tricking me and getting in that spiral of anxiety or depression with whether it's suicide ideation or it's overstressing about some small thing, and then it's often not actually the problem. It's either there's an underlying problem that something therapy can get you to, or it's brain chemicals can just set you in that mode where you don't even realize, because the feelings are real, the feelings are genuine, but you're reacting to something that is not direct stimulus. But you have to that cognitive behavior therapy gets you so you can take that step away and at least recognize, okay, wait, I'm not being logical.
Hmm. And that was the situation for me. Is what I did is, I first, I let people know, hey, this is where I'm at. I want you to know I'm reaching out. And then what I did is I threw myself into other things. Basically, for those who don't know me, I role play. I like role playing Dungeons and Dragons, Vampire the Masquerade, things like that. And I do a Vampire the Masquerade through a chat line situation. And so I sat down and I worked on a character for 2 days, working on what the character was going to be, what the character was going to do, all this kind of stuff, history, that kind of thing. And it got me to where I was thinking about something else, where I wasn't letting, as I like to say, I wasn't letting my mind eat itself,
Yeah.
because that's what happens is if I do not get out of my head, which is and do something else externally to get my mind doing something else, playing video games, whatever it takes, you have to do. I remember that Saturday evening, I finally got enough energy up to take a shower. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not dirty by any stretch of imagination. I use, like, baby wipes and stuff to stay to stay clean and stuff. But to be able to get into a shower and take a shower after 2 days of just it eating at me, and it was still there even when I was doing this other stuff, but it wasn't the most prevalent thing in my brain, and that's what helps me. When my mother passed away and my father was in the hospital, um I basically lived this was the first like huge major depression. I had depression most of my life, but it was not like this. My mother had just passed away. My father had just went back in the hospital, and for all rights and purposes, I knew in the back of my head he was not coming out. I lived on Little Debbie cakes and booze, and that's not healthy, and that's not a good coping mechanism. But at the time, I didn't have health care either, so it's not like I could go see. And I didn't see it. I saw it as that was a proper coping mechanism because I just lost my mother and my father's dying, and it's not a good coping mechanism. And that's one of the things is that I think that we need to be more upfront, not just. I love counselors. I love guidance counselors at high schools and junior high or at middle schools and stuff like that. But they deal with anywhere from 200 to 600 children a day because there's not that many of them. At least when I went to school, we had a class. My senior class was like 242. My senior class alone, we had about 1,000 students in the school. And that's not. And then we had one guidance counselor, or two actually. We had two guidance counselors, or so they dealt with 500 kids a day. If some kid, so they're overworked. There's no real counseling. And I remember the guidance counselor basically started a peer counseling group where we would help students talk about their problems and stuff like that, because they were overwhelmed and they had to turn to students to help them deal with being a teenager. And this was back in 1993. So, and kids today, and I say kids, I apologize, young people today have a lot more stressors on them, because if you're bullied at school, when I was growing up, when you were bullied at school and you got home, you were no longer bullied. You didn't have to worry about that anymore, because for how many glorious hours you were at your house or in your neighborhood, you were safe. No one, and no one's they're not going to drive by and yell at you because they don't have a car. Kids today with social media, they can never escape it. Yeah. And so a lot of people is like, oh, they're just they just don't understand. It's like, no, they completely, it's like I was bullied when I was in school. It's like, so was I, but I also understand that I got away from it for several hours a day. These kids don't get that opportunity because social media, and I'll keep wanting to say Facebook because that's, I don't know what the youth use today for
Instagram,
their social,
Snapchat.
Yeah. So, but you can't escape that. It's always there.
Well, to be fair, there are also a lot more resources available online and groups of support, especially for socially awkward folks, now that we have this online access to other people.
That's true. And a couple of the things that we posted, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, but both of them have chat lines on it as well if you don't want to call.
So where did you get this quote?
I got it from
Christian counselors.
I got it from the article that's linked below it.
Do you want me to read that?
Well, I mean, it's basically that. I mean, you can if you want to.
Well, I think there's stuff in there that's worth discussing.
Okay.
And we want to especially bring it back to, your whole Bible Christian view of this kind of thing. Okay. So some Christian counselors view depression in a certain way. And this quote in particular, it actually reminds me of the Scientologists and their view of it. And I have an experience I can share there. But anyway, quote, that mental illness was a social construct created by secular doctors and psychiatrists, and therefore is not biblical. So when a person is depressed, he's really just experiencing sadness. And to try to treat it medically is to short-circuit the power of God. When a person is anxious, she is really just experiencing worry. And to treat it medically is a secular answer to a spiritual problem. Ooh, that upsets me so much. It is so outside of, medical science And I don't think that religion and science need to be one against the other. I know someone who was involved with Church of Scientology back in Buffalo, and we basically had to rescue him. But I mean, I went in there to find out just what was going on, and they give you basically, hypocritically, a psychological test that is a standardized thing that I recognize because I was studying psychology. And then they use it to manipulate you, right? In this, oh, well, here's where your problem areas are, and here's how you can, better serve your life and God and everything. But they use a psychological test to manipulate you. And then they showed us this movie, and it was a movie about a kid who got tackled in a football game, and then he was paralyzed. And then doctors came to see him, and the movie goes like all black and white, and it's scary, creepy. Like the doctor's a quack, and then and there's nothing wrong with you. And then psychiatrist comes and tries to talk to him, and that looks like an even bigger quack, like nut job. And it's framed in this. Oh, the doctors and the shrinks are all just trying to manipulate you. You just have to believe. And it was because when you were unconscious, somebody said, oh no, he's not going to be able to walk, that you can't walk. That's the real reason, and God will just like take care of this. And then the kid, wakes up, and when somebody explains that to him, he gets up and he walks. And that is what this quote brought to mind, right? Like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just have faith. And that is dangerous.
Dangerous. Well, and he discusses that in the article. I read over the article, and he basically like, look, there is spiritual help that you can gather for this, but you also have to deal with the physical sides as well. You also have to deal. If I'm having depression and everything else, part of my help is my spirituality, is my faith. But I also know that because I'm depressed, or I'm sad, quote unquote, that I'm depressed, I'm having a crisis of faith. I'm not. My brain chemistry is out of whack, and I'm depressed.
Yeah, sadness and depression, not the same thing. Worry and anxiousness are not the same thing. It's interesting because this is Autism Awareness Month, and I saw a really good thing I posted the other day on Facebook about this, where people don't realize, that as well. You're not like a little autistic, or you got better, or you don't grow out of it. You grow into it. They're just wired differently. And these are things we understand now. And putting a spiritual counselor acting like, oh, you're just sad, God will deliver you, seems... I'm sorry, I'm just horrified by that, especially because they're saying, oh, if you try to treat it medically, if you try to get help, you're short-circuiting the power of God. When you are in the throes of depression, being told something like that could definitely aggravate suicidal ideation, because at that point, where do you go? As a person of faith, wouldn't you be like, so God wants me to be sad. God wants me to hurt. God wants me to suffer. We have enough crisis of faith in this world about why does God let terrible things happen to good people, without taking a depressed person and saying, no, if praying doesn't make it go away, it's just the way it's supposed to be. That's fucked up.
It is. And it's not just, and it's, why doesn't God love me enough to get me out of this, to help me feel better? And then you start, and there's a spiral you don't want to go down. As a spiritual person, it's like, am I not good enough for God? Am I sinful? What am I? And at that point, you really start eating, your brain starts eating itself.
Yeah. And instead of a font of comfort and that faith should be.
Right.
At that point, it's just adding fuel to the fire of self-degradation.
Well, it's like this, God's supposed to be a fountain of joy and peace and love. And what they've turned that into is a drowning pool.
Ugh.
Because that's what yeah. So it's like it came to that I'm sorry, I had to pat myself on the back because that came to me. I'm just like,
Yeah, why would
for
they
that.
do that though? Why? I don't understand. I mean,
Because they don't
why? I mean,
believe in science.
The Scientologists, I know why. A, crazy. B, they have a monetary, like a
Right.
history of just taking advantage of people for, money. So they have some kind of motivation there. Catholics, why wouldn't you want someone to go get help? I don't know, maybe because you were molesting them. Sorry, I know it's not all of you, but like, what the hell is the
Wow.
motivation of a person in authority and faith acting like you shouldn't go get medical help? Just pray.
I
I don't understand.
So the article I linked under that, where it basically, says, you need to do these things. It says, you need to do these things is like power of positive attitude, and then they give scripture, reining in feelings and emotions, because that's the whole problem. I've been told by multiple people that part of my problem is that I bottle up my emotions, that I don't let myself feel my pain, that I suck it up. I know that I did that, when my parents passed away, is I sucked it up. So, and then is like, take time out. The world is fast paced, blah blah blah. Take time out and stuff like that. Don't change too much change. Try not to. But here's the thing: confront your fears. Is like, confront anxiety with confidence. I mean, these are the things. The healing power of humor. Yeah, okay. Avoid dangerous addictions. It's like, well, duh. But for the most part, it's the exact opposite of what the guy was saying. It's like, yeah, positive attitude. And I'll tell you something else. A lot of these people that are counselors, especially there's a movie that came out last year. It's called The Trump Prophecy, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but basically it's this guy this guy's a firefighter, has PTSD because he couldn't save a child, and that's traumatic. Okay, so he goes and seeks this counselor, and this counselor is basically got a shield that's got a bunch of books he's written about positive attitude through Christianity thinking. That's the counseling. And so this guy really never got the counseling he needed. And then he has this vision that Trump is supposed to be president, and so his wife, the counselor's wife, basically takes over and is like, oh, we need to make sure this happens. So instead of getting this guy help he needs for his PTSD and depression, they basically feed into the images that he's getting. And don't get me wrong, I'm if this would have been the Obama prophecy or the Hillary prophecy, I would have still said the same thing. That's fucked up. This guy obviously needs help, and what you're doing is feeding into his delusions. Because of the fact that I've got a book to sell, so here's a book. Because a lot of these big name counselors in the Christian community have 3 or 4 books about counseling at the minimum, as well as other books. They are buy my book people, and that's why they don't send them to proper medical people. That's why they tell them to buy the books. That's part of it. And it sounds so manipulative, but it's just like what you said about Scientology. It's not that much different as far as some, and I'm not saying all. Again, let's be clear. Just like not all Catholic priests are diddlers, not all, not all Christian counselors have a book to sell.
Right.
But there is enough of that out there to cause a problem. To be, hey, and the Bible really doesn't touch on this. And there's a reason why. I mean, they say, positive think of God and God will get you through. God also, back then, they didn't even know what depression was. So you really can't have that discussion. People had melancholy, and even in Victorian times, I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. And I had to look this term up because I didn't understand it even back then. Of course, when I first read it, I didn't have the Google. Now I do, and I still have to Google it to remind myself. But there were multiple occasions where they talk about brain fever, which is basically hysteria and a form of mental illness, that these people would suffer. They would suffer major depression and stuff like that. And but they termed it brain fever. And so, because they didn't have the terms, even just.
Can
Uh,
we go into hysteria?
oh, yeah. Yeah. Women hysteria. Oh, you're just being a woman. Yeah. It's like, oh, that woman is just being so hysterical. No, she's having a mental breakdown because you're an idiot.
Yeah, and the symptoms are like, oh, she's being a bitch. So she's obviously mad. We have to lock her up because, I mean, if she's got her period and she's being a bitch. What? Just, yeah. The stuff. I mean, even down to the bloating, they're like specific.
Yeah. No. And well, here's the other thing is like, the Catholic Church, if you remember one of the classic horror movies, The Exorcist, the main priest, and I can't remember his name, and I apologize, I should have looked this up, but he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and he's like, look, Catholic Church really doesn't believe in exorcisms anymore. All of it is mental illness, and I need to evaluate her with mental, through psychiatry before I can even look at an idea of mental illness, or an exorcism, so even, exorcisms, were considered, if a woman is acting out or whatever. I mean, I just watched a thing about Lucy from Dracula and how she's portrayed, and how the men around her react. It's she's acting outside of the norm of Victorian womanhood, and therefore, she needs to be put down. It's the same situation when it comes to mental illness, especially in Victorian times. And you got to remember, Victorian times, especially the height of Victorian times, which is the 1880s or whatever, is really only 140 years removed from us. It's in the grand scheme of human history, that is tiny. That is a tiny amount of time that we have discovered so much about mental illness, and we're still discovering so much more about it. So, yeah, of course, the Bible doesn't really talk about what it talks about. It talks about, turning your faith to God, and God will see you through.
Yeah, it's a lot of power of positive thinking stuff, right?
Right. But here's what I want to say to that as well. It's that, as a person of faith, leaning on your faith is a good thing, because God wants you to be happy. God wants you not to be miserable. Yes, God, God is going to send you trials and tribulations, but there is a statement in the Bible that God will only send as much as you can handle. That's the first part. No.
That trite bit really, as a person not so much of faith, and you get in a state and you want support from your friends and they say that shit to you. Ooh. Really?
No, that's
really from somebody who has survived a suicide attempt, barely. No, it was more than I could fucking handle. Seriously.
No, and here's the situation. If you were to come to me and it's like, I am having a really bad depressive episode right now, the first words out of my mouth is like, God will only give you as much as you can handle, because that's just stupid, because that's not the thing. The first words out of my mouth is I love you and I will do whatever I can to help you. That is what Christians are supposed to do. Christians, if I need to get you to a doctor, I will get you to a doctor. Kind of situation. It's one of those, I love you and I will help you any way I can.
Yes. What can I do?
What can I do to help you? Not, oh God, God will heal you if you believe. It's like, no, if they want to talk about their faith, talk about their faith, but don't do it in such a way that it comes off as like, you're struggling because you're not putting enough faith in it. Talk about talk about their faith and what they find. If they want to talk about that, if they're a person of faith, talk about their faith in a way is like, what with your faith gives you strength.
I found an article I will put in our notes and such
Okay.
about how actually that God won't give you more than you can handle is not biblical.
And
And a case against it. So,
yeah, no,
don't do that to people.
yeah. But it's one of but here's the thing. God also gave us brains and gave us the ability to reason and gave us science,
Right. And I can tell you where it looks like it comes from, right? They use 1 Corinthians 10:13.
Mm-hmm.
1 Corinthians, sorry.
Oh, did you become Donald Trump on me for a minute? Oh my God.
I was just reading it, though. At least I wasn't like just holding it up and acting. I was reading it. So, anyway, the verse actually states, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it."
Right.
So, they're using, like, temptation as a trial or sin or suffering and just kind of shoving that in there.
Right. And like I said, here's the thing.
But I read that more as like, okay, there is a way out, is what the emphasis should be. Not the emphasis on, oh, it's not more than you can handle. Putting that on a person, it seems like a really twisted way of using a Bible verse.
Right. So how right. So how I would interpret that is like God has given you tools, as far as if there is something that you are struggling with, there are tools to help you. That there are doctors, there are nurses, there is medication, there is stuff like that. There is science to help you. And again, we'll be talking more about this at the end of the month about the belief of science. But I am an advocate that I am a person of faith, but I also know that science is a thing that is real, that is factual, that is based on reality and is useful. Science is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Lewis Black talks about science and stuff like that, and how, especially medical science, because we're still learning about the human body. For what centuries, leeching was and bloodletting was a thing. So again, it's one of those where the last 200 years or so has been where we have jumped dramatically over what we were for thousands of years prior to that.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to add that also in this verse, it's another one of those things that we end up often bringing up, where they're taking that verse and this one doesn't have malicious intent, right? That's what we normally end up addressing because we're usually talking about politics. Is they take something out of context to prove a point, and this is taken out of context just to try and lend support. It it's not the best way to do it, but it's also out of context because if you look at the context of the rest of the story that quote exists in, it's referring to sin.
right. Right. And but seeing we're sort of kind of transitioning about out of context and stuff like that. One of the things I want to touch on, and it's the most famous case that I remember that just comes screaming at me, is the case of the Virginia state senator who was assaulted by his son, and then his son took his own life. And it's State Senator Deeds. And the situation goes thusly that basically he had been trying to get his son into a mental facility for a while. Actually had a court mandated involuntary induction for his son, but there were no beds available in the state of Virginia. We're not talking one county. We're talking the state of Virginia. There were no beds available for his son.
Yep. I am familiar with that concept.
Eh,
Especially for juveniles, there aren't enough.
and that is terrible. But our nation, and this is going to get into another topic for a second, but our nation is so wanting to make sure that every single human being that lives in this nation has 25 guns, but we can't get mental help for those who need it. There was a huge problem, and I don't know how. If I don't think it's improved greatly, it's improved a little, but for a long time, a lot of the homeless and out there were vets because they couldn't handle coming back. One of my favorite movies of all time is First Blood, which I know is an action quote unquote movie, but it also talks about what mental illness is when a person comes back from war.
Mm-hmm.
John Rambo had PTSD, had depression, and they hit it fairly well as far as discussing that. Not as good as The Deer Hunter, don't get me wrong, but the Deer Hunter is really slow for me. But what I'm saying is that they talk about it and they discuss it, and it's one of those situations where you understand to some degree what they're going through, but yet we've done nothing to change it. Um for those vets that come back and have seen atrocity after atrocity on the war, seeing their buddies die and stuff like that, you do not come out of that normal.
Yeah.
Someone who faces death. Mm-hmm.
There's a history of this in our country that's wild, and no way it's on the right end of the spectrum. Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Jesus. I remember
in 1984, this. Yeah, I mean, he seriously, the state of California, when he was still there, was the first state to deinstitutionalize mentally ill patients. They passed this act that basically just pushed mentally ill folks out of all the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And he continued this practice when he became president. So the administration just ended federal government's role in providing any services to the mentally ill. And our homeless population increased then exponentially. It has never recovered or been brought back to the lower levels it was, then. And yeah, veterans were a huge part of that, because they at least had a line in, because of the medical care provided by being members of the military, got them into the system to begin with to get some help. But it's very much the beginning of the homeless crisis, especially among veterans and the mentally ill. Mm-hmm. And it's been horrifying, and it persists in so many ways. This underfunding, we can't be part of it. Oh no, the government can't take over health care. Persists in that, even though I have health care coverage, even though we could find the help. My son had suicidal ideation. I took him to an emergency room. The closest bed they could find for an adolescent was 6 hours away.
Jesus Christ.
And we had to commit him in Jackson, out on the coast, actually. And so then I had to use up all my saved up HSA healthcare money to stay in hotels nearby there. Once in a, as much as I could anyway, to at least not be fucking more than 6 hours away. That's ridiculous.
It is. And here's the thing.
And for children, like for adults, I know people who've been, there's a place in town, one of the hospitals in town has a floor. They don't always have beds, but they rotate more often than that. But for adolescents, it being even worse is criminal.
Mm. Oh, well, and I mean, and you would think Ronald Reagan, after what he went through right after he became president, that he would be more sympathetic to the plight of those of mentally ill.
One would think.
Well, so one of those, and yeah, and that's one of the nice things about Obamacare, at least, made it to where healthcare providers had to have a mental health part of their coverage. Because I remember when I first got my own health care, it did not cover mental health. It did not cover a counselor. It covered me seeing a psychiatrist once a month for medication, but that wasn't going to do me any good. And this was back in 1995, 96.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and I was suicidal and depressed then. And here's the thing. And this is a struggle I have, because I've been on medication. I was on medication in the early 90s, and it was Prozac. And I hated it for its side effects, because, and I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound a little weird, a little TMI, so forgive me. But I have a problem with a medication that is supposed to make me be able to not be depressed and then not be able to enjoy sexual activities. I think that doesn't work well. I mean, that's just, that's my personal thing. I think that is like, wow, that's a depressing.
It's really, yeah, that's a rough and common side effect in antidepressant medications.
So, I'm not anti-medication. I'm anti-medication for me. And that is a struggle I'm having with my friends, is like, you really need to be on a medication. And I'm like, great, can we find something that isn't going to have that kind of side effect? Because that's just going to make me more depressed. I'm just like, yeah. I was like, so, but I understand that there's a lot of the medications, they're getting better about that. And it's not as severe of a side effect as it was back in the early 90s when Prozac first came out. And the other thing is, I originally wanted to start with a quote from a song. And I thought about it, and I read it a couple of times, and I'm like, and you had the same kind of issues about it too. But one of the things is that back in the 80s, psychiatry and stuff kind of got bumped up to where rich people would go and see a psychiatrist, and it was a rich person's problem if you had depression or whatever, because you had too much money to deal with. It wasn't so much the common people have depression. That was what was kind of done in the 80s when we were growing up, and when we were seeing psychiatrists and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I want to say that we're here together to help each other, and psychiatrists and psychologists and counselors are there to help you. Are they running a business? Of course they are. Everybody because we have to have money. That's just the way life is right now in a capitalist society. But they're there because they took these courses in this because they generally want to help people, and they want to help people get over these, or at least be able to cope with these depressions, anxiety, bipolar, manic depressive, bipolar, whatever, borderline personality disorders, all these different things. They want to help people to be able to cope and have normal, semi-normal lives. No one is normal. No one is sane. Okay, we all have our quirks. Okay, but people with depression, people with anxiety, which are the two big ones, people, there are others, but those are the two that, and autism. And I don't know how to label autism. Is it a mental illness, or is it more is it more of, okay,
it's a developmental difference. It is
Okay.
only a disability because there are more of there are more non-autistic people in the world than there are autistic people. So
Right.
that's like the only reason it's a disability. What it is it's just a developmental difference in their brain. So like
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the brain, like there's a quote normal end quote trajectory of how your brain develops, and theirs develops kind of out of order,
Okay.
right? So like speech will develop at a different level, and sometimes some things will like really hyper overdevelop, while other parts underdevelop by the the trajectory that people are used to. And so them functioning along with everyone else, it needs to be accommodated to. And that's why you get things like savants that turn out, yeah, they were autistic. People think they can't communicate, and that's not true either. There are some that are speech delayed, for instance, and they have trouble looking you in the eye, but that's just because the brain works differently. Some are over social, which is something like I had a psychiatrist telling me, no, no, your son's not in the spectrum. No, no, he's not. No, he doesn't have Asperger's. And people make this like, but he's so friendly and social. Well, yeah, but like also that too much inappropriate spouting stuff that a lot of kids on the spectrum do is can be indicative, because it's just out of order with things like understanding social cues,
Right.
is a different part of the brain, and so they just walk all over that because they don't get, like, those things don't connect the same way. So anyway, yeah, it's just a developmental difference. It's not a psychological disability, but of course you do have to watch for different psychological issues that result from not being treated or identified or handled properly when you're developing differently.
And I because I wanted to differentiate, because some people put it into mental illness, and I knew.
Yeah, and there's a lot of misconceptions there, because there are levels of it, like
Hmm.
1, 2, 3, and people think that's how autistic you are, and that's not it either. It's more the level of help you need to be able to function. I don't know, on an acceptable level for your abilities. And I
And
will put
the
the link to that great video in our notes because it is really good. There's a short educational video on how it works.
and
Sorry, did I throw you off?
no, I'm something just clicked, and I want to post when I get a chance. There it is.
Okay.
So there is and like with anxiety, and I'm going to post a link to the video that I'm going to discuss for a second. It's a link to Jordan, and I am going to mess up this name, Rescapilios. She is a transgender woman who is the lead singer of a Australian band called Access of Awesome. They're most famous for doing a song called Four Chords, talking about the four chords of music
Yeah,
that for
yeah, it's a
pop
really
hits.
cute song.
But she talks about how she has high functioning anxiety, which means that she can go up on stage and be perfectly fine. This is where she's comfortable. It's small social settings. So anxiety has levels and differences. Depression has differences. There are different levels of depression. You know, someone said that depression is a broad stroke, much like autism is a broad stroke. You know, there are levels of autism, there's a levels of depression, and we're learning that it's not one thing, that we're not all, you can't say, okay, you have depression and you don't, because they score higher on this chart that we've created.
Right.
And it's changed since then. There are levels to it. Like I have major depression while someone else may have a mild depression, but they still have depression, you
Yeah.
know. And that's the situation. Getting out of bed for me, a good chunk of my days is a victory in its own right. Getting in a shower is a victory, and things like that. And there's another video I'll also link, and it's, if I can find it, because they never label their videos, but it's about talking about how, thank you, we understand that it is a struggle. It's a poem, and it's a struggle, but it's basically, I can understand Kurt Cobain, and I can understand, what happened, and for those people who fight every day, thank you. We understand. And that's it. We have those who have major depression, and there's more than you may never know per se, because they won't some people. I've become more open about my mental illness to the point I don't care who knows, but there are people that won't talk about it. There are people that think that's that they go and they do their psychiatry and stuff like that, and then they don't talk about it except for those people that they're really close to.
Well, yeah, stigma. I mean,
Yeah. um And another thing is that in certain communities, it's even worse. And I know that with the African American community, there is a huge stigma about mental health issues.
yeah.
And that, if you have mental health, you're not having mental health issues, you're just not strong enough. So, or you're just not good enough, or whatever the case may be. So, and so we have to, as a society, have to get over that. And it's hard when you have, your politicians and church leaders saying you have to get over that. And that's something that I have, that's one of the reasons I want to talk about this is like, look, if you're having mental health issues, please understand that you're not alone. That if you're a person of faith, that doesn't mean that you're having a crisis of faith. That means that you're having a problem with your brain chemistry, and it's okay. It's perfectly okay to have that problem. Because you will be loved, you will be respected, and we will do everything we can to help you. Don't listen to people who say that it's because of this, or because, that it's because, you're having a crisis of faith. That's not the case at all. The fact that you come out and say that you're having a problem shows that you have more faith than they do. So, there's a couple of things. So, there's a couple of places that you can go to. I wanted to talk about, for acute problems, especially with suicidal tendencies. There is the suicide prevention lifeline, and you can go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org, or you can call them at 800-273-8255. There's also the Trevor Project for those who, especially teenagers and young adults who are of the LGBTQ community. You can go to the trevorproject.org or 866-488-7386. You can call them, or you can chat them. They also have a way that you can text them, all of that stuff, and they will help you out. And then September has posted something as well.
Yeah, the National Institute for Mental Health is a really good resource. The URL is not really easy to remember, but if you go to mentalhealth.gov, it can link you to very easily all of these suicide prevention lifelines, veterans help specifically, and even sources to find like scale sliding providers or help regardless of income level at all in your area. They're like nice little clickable, I need help now, help me find someone. And some of these sites also have just, you can chat with someone right away.
And don't be afraid don't be afraid to reach out to your friends and family, those people that you love, because they love you and they want to help you. Have a plan. That's one of the things is that helped me through that trial this past weekend, is I have a plan. There are things that I do if I am at that point that is mandatory, that I'm able to do, that I reach out to certain individuals that check on me and make sure I'm okay. and have a plan. Have people that you can trust, that you love, that doesn't judge you. Because we all have friends that judge us, and we have friends that don't. And it's just, that's we have life choices like that, or friends that aren't as helpful as other friends. There are friends that can definitely help you, and have a plan and discuss that with them. It's like, look, I'm going through depression, or I have depression. There are some times where I may have a really bad day. Can I reach out to you at any time and you will be there, to make sure I'm okay? And then they will then set in motion everything else, and talk to you. It's like, okay, put on a video game, put on a movie, do something, get yourself out of your head.
Yeah.
Have you taken a shower? Have you eaten today? Ask those kind of questions to you in a way that helps you.
And it can be literally life-saving. I have been fortunate, to have friends like that. When I had my last major crisis, I called her, and I know she has her own mental health issues. She understands it. She gets treatment. She's part of the healthcare system. And I was like, hey, I woke up and I was really, really upset that I did. And she came over immediately, and right in my house and up into my bedroom upstairs, and sat there and asked those, questions, but mostly just listened, and called my husband and said, get your ass home right now to take her to the hospital, and just sat with me and made sure I was safe until that could happen. And I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I had that person. And I'm happy to be that person. I think most people in my life don't realize, because I'm pretty stable most of the time, like very stable. I hold everybody else up. I'm that kind of person. And I am I get middle of the night calls from folks. I'm a support system. They're hysterical. I've had to contact, using online sources for people that are on the other side of the country that had an issue. Like, oh my God, send the police. I think she's not safe. Or just go to somebody's house, or just stay on the phone and be a voice. You probably have someone you don't even realize. Hopefully you have someone. If you don't have anyone, go online and find a chat resource and reach out. But please get help. You are not alone in this world.
And you brought up something, and I want to touch on this for just a second, because it's a trouble I have. There's this thing called wellness checks that police officers, you call the police. It's non-emergency, so it's not 911. It's a non-emergency, and they'll do a wellness check on someone. I do believe in those situations, this is something that also needs to happen, and I know that police departments are not equipped for this, that they need to have a counselor ride with them when they're doing a wellness check. Because
this is actually something I addressed on Geek Grills recently, and we talked about, and we asked people, and I'll do it again here. Call your local police department. There are programs, even locally here in the Charlotte area. I know there are programs going on where mental health organizations are working to train police officers in these situations, so they are better prepared. For many reasons, because things escalate to violence, for instance, when someone is having a mental health crisis. But for wellness checks, to connect with them, but creating some kind of training. Call your local police department, ask what kind of mental health training their officers, their beat cops have, and try to connect them with organizations that will provide that if they don't have it, because that can help everyone around you.
Mm-hmm. Because that's there's so much put on our police, and this is just another thing that's put on our police, especially in this day and age. And for them to have that kind of training, so that they come in to de-escalate the situation, and because when you see when a policeman or a police person is confronted with someone with a gun, and there's this term that is it's death by cop, suicide by cop.
People ideate that way,
mm-hmm.
and they'll just say they have a gun, right? So training, I think the only reason this training isn't already prevalent in our law enforcement system is stigma. And you as a citizen can go ahead and take a step over that stigma by just bring it. Bring it to your sheriff, bring it to your police chief, and ask them.
Right.
To do
and
this.
That, because it's a very important. I know there was one of the reasons Charlotte did it was several years ago. There was a gentleman who was, basically pushed the police to shoot him, and he was at Brookshire. For those who know Charlotte, he was on the Brookshire Bridge over I-85, and he started to pull out something that they thought was a gun, and they shot him. And it wasn't a gun at all. It was he had prearranged this. He had duct taped 2 screwdrivers together to look like a gun. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons they started doing that kind of training. There's been other incidences since then, and I'm not blaming the police on certain situations, because they are trained to react when they see especially a firearm, but any weapon, they are trained to react.
Mm-hmm.
And now because this is a prevalent way of committing suicide, in a way, because at that point, I don't know if they don't have I don't know how to describe it without it one way or another making it sound bad. So the basic term is for whatever reason they feel this is the best way for them to commit suicide. And so by having someone else do it, basically.
Yeah.
But on the same, then you get, so they're having to train these police officers not to go for the lethal method immediately, and to find out what's going on. There was that case of the autistic kid, or the autistic man, who and his counselor, who had his arms, for those who don't know, there's video of it out there, this counselor and an autistic man, extremely severely autistic, sitting in the road, and the cops have surrounded them. The counselor has his arms up, and the autistic man reaches for a truck. And I don't know if they couldn't tell it was a truck, because even in this grainy, very bad footage, I could tell it was a toy, that it was not a gun. It was a vehicle of some kind. He was reaching for this toy, and the police shot at him. Well, and one of the reasons I want to bring this up is because I think it was middle of last week, there was no charges brought against the officers who shot at them. And so, this training needs to happen, because, again, it's a stigma, and cops are so, and I can understand that, because this nation is gun crazy. I hate using the word crazy while we're talking about mental illness, but we have this fetish for guns. We have this need for guns. And the fact that the current administration and the previous Congress loosened gun laws so people with mental illnesses could still buy guns.
Yeah.
Are you stupid?
Well, yeah.
Okay, well, we are talking about we are talking about the
Mango Mussolini.
The orangutan, yeah. I'm sorry, that's wrong. That deface that
Don't
did
do that.
Yeah, poor orangutans. They don't deserve that. Yeah, the orangutans are simple, nice creatures, like our president. Anyway, see, we gotten back into politics, and we still bash our president while we're talking about mental illness. We're all healthy now.
So we could have a whole episode on the evidence of dementia in our president, but anyway.
I may end up directing people to Keith Overman talking.
But
yeah, Keith Overman, when he first started doing this thing, went through 25 before he was even a nominee. Went through these several points of where he out of a score of 34 of being being a psychopath, he scored a 29. And 20 is when you're considered a psychopath. So he scored a 29 on the scale. So yeah. So our president may be crazy.
So anyway,
but so we'll have these links and as well as the links of the discussions of the videos and everything in the comments, both in the YouTube and on the podcast when we get those up. So thank you for joining us at Heresy and Hearsay. I'm Reverend Barney. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Seth Roth II, and you can find the show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and podcasts, as well as our website. Just Google us. Don't forget our Patreon, where $2 a month can keep us going.
And again, I'm September, also 9 of 12. You can follow me on Twitch, Twitter, and hear me on the Geek Grills and Trust Your Cape podcasts. Thank you for listening today, and bless your hearts. All right, so I'm going to end the stream.